फ्रेंड्स, केजी क्लास में आपका स्वागत है। आज हम आपको लाइफ ऑफ मैथ्यू अर्नोल्ड 1822 टू 1888 हिज बर्थ एंड पेरेंटेज हेडिंग है। मैथ्यू अर्नोल्ड वाज बोर्न इन दिसंबर 1822 एट द हेम्पसाइड विलेज ऑफ लेवन नियर स्टेन्स। ही was the eldest son among the 9 children of Thomas Arnold, famous headmaster of Rugby, the founder of the modern public school system in England. The boy Arnold was a singularly handsome young man whose manners were Olympian and whose waistcoat were remarkable. As the secretary of Lord Lansdowne, a few years later he had entry to a society of talent and power where he was much in demand for dinner parties. Henry Crabb Robinson described him as a very gentlemanly young man with a slight tinge of hope that does not harm when blended with talents, good nature and high spirit. His hair was particularly soft and luxuriant. Arnold himself never lost his pride in his hair, that perpetual miracle, my hair, and offered to let a friend pull it to scotch any suspicion that it might be a big. Jowett said of him that he was the most sensible man of genius whom I have ever known and the most free from personality. Arnold owed much to his father's influence, his high sense of duty, his intellectual honesty and lofty moral ideas, though in many respects there was a little common between the son with his innate skepticism, his rather pessimistic outlook on life, and his ironical, old-fashioned, pious father. Arnold speaks very touchingly of his strong-scheduled father in Rugby Chapel. Still thou upraised with zeal the humble good from the ground, sternly represses the bad, still like a trumpet dost rose, those who with half-open eyes thread the borderland dim twixt virtue and vice, bewitched, scorched, that was work, it was thy life upon earth. His education. Matthew Arnold was educated at Winchester and then Rugby under his father. He proved himself to be an unusually intelligent and devoted student from the earliest student career. In 1840, he won an open scholarship at Balliol College, Oxford, both at school and college. He was much respected and popular. At Oxford, he took the Newdigate Prize with a poem on Cromwell. However, he unaccountably missed a first class in literal humanities at the university, but he made up for this by winning the Blue Ribbon of Oxford Scholarship and was elected, like his father, a Fellow of Oriel in 1845. His chief friends at Oxford were the poet Claude, Arthur Stanley, J.D. Coleridge, and J.C. Sharp. The most intimate of these friends was, of course, Arthur Claude. Claude was 3 years his senior at Rugby, and also a scholar of Balliol and Fellow of Oriel. On Claude's death at Florence in 1861, Arnold wrote his famous pastoral elegy, Thyrsis, 1867. Arnold had a deep and abiding love for Oxford. It more than any other influences molded his character and career. He had a filial devotion not only to the university but also to the city itself. He expresses his great love and admiration for the city of Oxford in these beautiful poetic words. Beautiful city steeped in sentiment as she lies, spreading her gardens in the moonlight and whispering from her towers the best enchantment of the Middle Ages. Who will deny that Oxford, by her infallible charm, keeps ever calling us nearer to the true goal of all of us, to the ideal, to perfection, to beauty, in a world which is only truth seen from another side. Adorable dreamer, whose heart has been so romantic, who has given thyself so prodigally, given thyself to sight and heroes not mine, only never to the Philistines, home of lost cases and forsaken belief, and unpopular names and impossible loyalties. Sorry. Arnold's graphic description of the beautiful landscape around Oxford in Thyrsis and the scholar Gypsy are known to every student of literature. Describing the country around Oxford in Thyrsis, Arnold writes, and that sweet city with her dreaming spires, she needs not June for beauty's heightening. Lovely all times she lies, lovely tonight. Too rare grow now my visits here. But once I knew each field, each flower, each step, and with the country folk acquaintance made by barn in threshing time by new built risk. His early career. Arnold started his career as a fifth form master at rugby, but only a year after he became in 1847 private secretary to Lord Lansdowne, president of the council in Lord Russell's government. He very much liked this employment. In 1851, however, he was appointed an inspector of school, a post which he held with great distinction for 35 years. Arnold threw himself in the somewhat prosaic task with his characteristic earnestness and devotion, evaluating his services as the inspector of schools. H.G. Rawlinson says he did for the primary schools what his father had done for the public schools. He helped to evolve order out of chaos and to make people look upon pedagogy as a science and above all as a national concern. His official work was varied by more than one tour on the continent, and his studies of French and German educational methods were embodied in two valuable reports, which have since become educational classics. Among the more important results of his efforts as inspector of schools may be noted the establishment of the Normal School in England, extension lectures, and the organization of London University as a teaching institute. He is counted among the great pioneers of popular education in England. He has been described as the father of the university extension movement. S.R. Littlewood says he encouraged the teaching of natural science, as at Rugby he brought into large educational field his father's aim in trying to ensure a younger generation composed of something more than wage earning machines. He propagated liberal culture for all, spreading a knowledge of the best that has been said and won in the world. Much of his early work was among non-conformist schools, and this gave him that insight into English middle-class life and religious belief which he uses with such effect in culture and anarchy. He dwelt, as he himself says, with the Philistines in their tents and broke bread with the barbarians. His faith and skepticism. Matthew Arnold rose to be the spokesman of the spirit of skepticism of his age. Arnold was baffled to note that the established social and religious values and institutions were gradually crumbling down under the impact of science and utilitarian philosophy. He attributed it largely to the inadequacy of Christianity as presented to us in the conventional form to satisfy present-day needs. The spirit of man hath found new roads, and we must leave the old faith and walk therein. Leave then the cross as ye have left carved gods, but guard the fire within. He regretted that the good old times of faith had passed away. There was a time when the sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like folds of a bright girdle hurled. But this sea of faith had now retreated to the rear. But now I only hear its melancholy long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind down the vast east drear and naked singles of the world. He criticized Christianity as a static and spent-up force. Like Carlyle, he believed that religion must be dynamic, not static. Religion is morality tinged with emotion. He interpreted God as that stream of tendency by which all things strive to fulfill the law of their beings. To him, religion meant conduct. He that doth the will of the Father shall know of my doctrine. Conduct, he said, is 3/4 of life, and the way to the knowledge of truth lies on the road of right doing. His view on art. Arnold believed that the remedy of the widespread frustration of his age lay in the revival of true culture. The revival of culture meant the revival of love of the beautiful. It was in this sense that he pleaded for the revival of culture meant the revival of love of the beautiful. It was in this sense that he pleaded for the revival of fine arts, especially poetry. He described poetry as the religion of the future. He said, the future of poetry is immense, because in poetry, where it is worthy of its high destinies, our race as time goes on will find an ever surer and surer stay. There is not a creed which is not second, not an accredited dogma which is not shown to be questionable, not a received tradition which does not threaten to dissolve. Our religion has materialized itself in the fact. In the supposed fact, it has attached its emotion to the fact, and now the fact is failing it. But for poetry, the idea is everything. The rest is a world of illusion, of divine illusion. Poetry attaches its emotion to the idea too. The idea is the fact. The stronger part of our religion today is its unconscious poetry. more and more mankind will discover that we have to turn to poetry to interpret life for us, to console us, to sustain us. Without poetry, our science will appear incomplete, and most of what now passes with us for religion and philosophy will be replaced by poetry. Extension lecture in America. In 1883, a pension was granted to Matthew Arnold. He had now been relieved of his official responsibilities. Therefore, following the example of Dickens, Thackeray, and other literary celebrities, Arnold went to America 1883 to give a series of public lectures. These lectures, though successfully published later on, were not a great success. Rawlinson says the exquisitely modulated voice, which had charmed the audiences assembled to listen to his lecture on the translating of Homer at Oxford, failed entirely to reach the vast crowds assembled to hear the British lion roar at Boston or New York, and those who could hear him probably had little relish for the irony of numbers or the majority of the romance. Yet Matthew Arnold recognized his discourage in America among his favorite works. His death. In 1886, Arnold retired from the department he had served so faithfully for 35 years. 2 years later, he died very suddenly for heart failure. While running to catch a train at Liverpool, there goes our last Greek, someone remarked upon hearing the news of his death. A better tribute could not have been paid to the departed soil. It was surely the death of a Christian, said Laniel, thrilling, but quite as surely it was the death of a Roman of the great mold. Republican, stoic, administrative, for the aim of Arnold's lifelong thought and action was an idealized and Christianized Roman Empire, its cornerstone responsibility, its pinnacle unity. His message. Matthew Arnold has a message to give to humanity. His twofold mission of life was first to tell good people to be beautiful, and then to entreat beautiful people to be good. His purpose was to discover truth in the form of beauty, sweetness, and light. This was his definition of true culture. Matthew Arnold played his role in several capacities: as a poet, as a critic of letters, as an essayist dealing with politics, religion, and social problems. In all these roles, he maintained the same high seriousness, the same standard of sweetness and light. Campagnac says a foe of whatever is slovenly in ideas. He is a foe of whatever is clumsy in speech, an advocate of righteousness. He is for that reason a lover of beauty. These two, righteousness and beauty, joined together by God. He stoutly refused to sunder. He desired both because he thought that neither could be perfectly achieved or born without the other, because in fact he thought that these two are one. Evaluating the character of Matthew Arnold, Campagna says no man is beyond censure. Few men afford in a criterion by which they tempt us to test themselves and bear the test as well as he. Moderation, the natural but disciplined habit of balance of poise, freedom from exaggeration, reasonableness, unvarnity, just reserve, a generous self abandoned these with vigorous steadfastness and courage are qualities of style in literature and in other arts. They are qualities of manner in social behavior and the conduct of affairs. They are qualities of character, and they are the qualities in art, in conduct, in character, which Matthew Arnold praises. The opposite of these he denounces. Best of luck.